end. All right, so we are in the Torah portion, Vayeshev. And Vayeshev is going to be starting in Genesis. Let me find it here. 37:1 to 40:23. That's a good section of scripture, good length. So the Torah portion summary is this. The ninth reading from the book of Bereshit, Genesis, is named Vayeshev, which means, and he dwelt. The title comes from the first verse of the reading, as most of them do, which says, now Yaakov dwelt, so he dwelt, Yaakov dwelt, in the land where his father has sojourned, in the land of Canaan. So
May I have a little more coffee? Of course, if there is some.
7:1.
Go ahead.
Despite the portion's name and first verse, the story is actually about Yaakov's son Yosef and how he was removed from the land of Canaan and dwelt in Mitzrayim, Egypt. The narrative follows Yosef from Canaan to Egypt, Mitzrayim, to prison. In addition, this week's reading contains the story of Yehuda, Judah, and Tamar. So Vayeshev, for my Hebrew readers, that vav on the front of a word, if you add a vav in the front, it means and, right? Okay, so it's a conjunction. Yeshav, which is going to be a yod, shin, vet. Yeshav means to dwell. Strong's H3427. And Gesenius tells us that it means to sit or to sit down or to dwell. So what does dwell mean? What's
reside, live.
Reside, live. Yeah, to have. It's where you're going to have life. It's where you park your easy chair and sit. So it has kind of a wide variety of meanings there, right? Okay, so Genesis 37:1. Yaakov lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations. We've talked about this word. This is another one of those toldot moments. These are the generations, narrative, stories, events, not just a chronological record of Yaakov. Yosef, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. So just a little hint. I don't know if you've figured this out yet or not, but when you read in the Tanakh or the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah, if someone is a shepherd, you can bet shekels to bagels that it's a picture of the Messiah, right? Or someone who's walking with the Father in a correct way, right? Generally speaking, this is a very positive thing until you get to like Ezekiel when he talks about shepherds being wolves all of a sudden. Okay, in Isaiah, Yeshayahu 40:10 and 11, it says, behold, the Lord comes with might, and his arm rules for him. So that ruling arm, in Hebrew it's zeroah. It's the same thing that's the part of the lamb that you eat at Passover that you put on the table. That's the zeroah that represents Yeshua. So his arm, God's arm, rules for him. So who's going to be the king in the kingdom? Yeshua. He's the one who rules, right? Behold, his reward is with him and his recompense before him. So he doesn't do this because he's paid to do it. His own reward. He wants to do this. He loves his father, right? He will tend his flock like a shepherd, and he will gather the lambs in his arms, and he will carry them in his bosom, and gently lead those that are with young. Yehezkel 34:23 says, and I will set up over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he shall feed them and be their shepherd. So now just kind of think about this. So this is Ezekiel writing, okay? I will set up over them one shepherd, my servant David. Who's he talking about?
Yeshua.
David kind of moves Yeshua in.
Yeah, so is he talking about David himself?
No.
No, because Ezekiel's writing after David died, right? Okay, so he's not talking, he's talking about the ancestor, the person who takes his place as king, right? He's talking about Yeshua. Because Ezekiel prophesied after Melech David's death. John 10:7-18, Yohanan 10:7-18. So Yeshua said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will save and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd." You know, the one that Ezekiel talked about, right? The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. Remember, the verse told us that he doesn't do this for his own recompense. He's not a hired hand. He does it because he loves his Father. I am the good shepherd, he repeats. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. So during Yeshua's time, who's his audience?
Judah.
Yehuda, the Jews, right? But he says, I got this other fold you know nothing about. Meaning the northern kingdom that got taken away, right? I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. The implication is, you guys aren't listening here. So there will be one flock and one shepherd. In other words, the role of Messiah, the role of king, is to bring together the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom back into one monarchy, right? Instead of two houses. For this reason, verse 17, for this reason, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father. So back to Bereshit, Genesis 37. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report to them, to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all the other brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully of him. So, junior Bible translators, get ready. What word would you imagine dibatam comes from? So it says, and Joseph brought a bad report. That word report is dibatam. So if you work through your verbal roots, okay, your first thought is going to be that this comes from this report word. What's a report made up of? And we put those on paper. We call those things, we read them. What do we read? What's on the page? What's on that page? What are those things? Words, right? So you would immediately think it comes from davar, which is words. Okay, devarim, words. But yeah, no, that would be Greek. But if we think this, it would be wrong. Okay, it comes from the word dibah, D-I-B-B-A-H, dibah. So the outline of biblical usage uses whispering, defamation, and evil report. Okay, so Joseph brought an evil report. So it's not just like Devar Ra, okay, an evil word, okay. This is a separate root word, and it means whispering, defamation, okay, an unfavorable saying.
And is that for the report, Albert?
The verbal root is dalet, bet.
Yeah, because mine is saying don't bet tov mem.
Yeah, so dibatom is the word. That's the whole word. But the root of that is dalet bet, which means to whisper negatively.
Oh, and then the tom on the end is the plural.
The is the plural. That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. So debab, when we look at that root word, it means to move slowly, to glide or glide over. So you just, you tell a story and you just leave things out. You glide over that part, right? You don't tell the whole truth. So in the sense of something being furtive, to slander, defame, evil report, infamy, or slander, according to Strong's. So we start to get a better idea of what Yosef was doing here. Bamidbar, Numbers 14:36 says, and the men whom Moshe sent to spy out the land, who returned and made all the congregation grumble against him by bringing up a bad report, dibah again, about the land. The men who brought up a bad report, dibah ra, of the land, died by plague before Yehovah. That's not good. At least in my world, plague bad, right? Okay. You think COVID's bad. So of those men who went to spy out the land, only Yehoshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Yefuneh, remained alive. Okay. All right. Mishle, Proverbs 26:22-28. The words of a slanderer are like delicious morsels. Oh, pass me another cannoli, right? They go down into the inner parts of the body, and then they get lodged in the fat cells. Like the glaze covering an earthen vessel are the fervent lips with an evil heart. Whoever hates disguises himself with his lips. Remember, Yehovah sees the truth, okay? And harbors deceit in his heart. When he speaks graciously, believe him not, for there are 7 abominations in the heart. Though his hatred be covered with deception, his wickedness will be exposed in the assembly. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. And where does Joseph end up? In a pit, right? Okay. And a stone will come back on him who starts it rolling. A lying tongue hates his victims, and a flattering mouth works ruin. So Proverbs, Mishle 10:18. One who conceals hatred has lying lips, and whoever utters slander is a fool. You have a problem with your brother, but go talk to others about it. So it's not really a big deal, right? Actually, it says it is a big deal, right? Okay, so Matityahu, Matthew 18:15-17 says, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone, right? Doesn't say post it on Facebook. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take 1 or 2 others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church, and I'm going to insert a word here to get the proper understanding, church leadership. And if he refuses to listen even to the church leadership, let him be to you a Gentile and a tax collector. So it doesn't mean call up the church prayer group and tell them all what's going on, right? Let Yehovah judge between you and me, but you still can't go around talking behind their back. So, by the way, if when you are kicked out of the church, which is what he's describing. You went through this process. Okay, so he says at the last step, they're still not listening. We're going to excommunicate them from the church. Okay? So if you're at that point, he then calls those people that just got excommunicated a Gentile and a tax collector. So what does that mean they were before that? Not a Gentile. Well, no, if they're in the church,
Part of the family.
yeah, you're part of the family. You're part of the kahal, the church group, the believers, right? But you're no longer a Gentile. You came out of the Gentiles, joined the church, right? And then if you get excommunicated, now you are a Gentile again. There's only two groups. There's either Gentiles or believers, right? The Bible calls the believers Israel, right? So I hear people say, well, I'm a Gentile, I'm a Christian. No, sorry, you got a category error here, okay?
One or
Leadership kicked you out because of disobedience, so you are a disobedient non-follower of Jesus now. But you don't get to say, I'm a Gentile Christian. Okay, that is a category error. Okay. Okay, little sidebar there, sorry, little rant. Okay, Leviticus 19:16 through 18. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not stand up against the life of your neighbor. I am Yehovah. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance, a form of slander, or bear a grudge, hiding hatred in your heart, against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am Yehovah. So this is where Yeshua gets his Matthew 18 commentary that we were just reading about. He wasn't making it up, okay? He was fulfilling pleru, to fulfill, okay, properly by interpreting Torah in Matthew 18. All right, Proverbs 25:9-10. Argue your case with your neighbor himself, and do not reveal another's secret, lest he who hears you bring shame upon you, and your ill repute have no end. Again, not a good thing, right? James 4:11. Do not speak evil against one another, brothers. The one who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the Torah and judges the Torah. But if you judge the Torah, you are not a doer of the Torah, but a judge. So we did this verse way back at the beginning of the year when we were doing the book of James, right? So let's go back and look at this a little bit. He's making a rabbinic argument here. Understanding his command to not speak evil is the easy part, okay? The part about judging someone else may not be as clear as we think. This is a verse that people use to fend off disapproval by claiming, well, the New Testament teaches us not to judge. But notice that the parallel that James creates, it's all about parallelism in Hebrew writing, okay? A is to B, is C is to D. So to speak is to judge. That's the parallel. So let's go back. I want your eyes to spin. Do not speak evil against one another, brothers. The one who speaks against a brother or judges his brother. So speaking and judging are the parallel. Okay. In the Greek, it's kalaleo, to speak against a brother. Like the Greek almost makes it more clear. Okay. The emphasis is on maliciousness, not discernment. Okay, so it's not like, well, is tuna clean or unclean? Let's have a discussion of this. Okay, he's not saying that they eat tuna in their house. type thing. That's not the thing, okay? This is malicious intent towards another. Do not speak maliciously, because when you speak maliciously, you are now not doing Torah. You've become the judge of Torah. So it's not about action. Saul says that we are to discern that, okay? Don't slander another. Don't accuse without justification. When you do that, you place yourself above the Torah. The Torah clearly says, do not bear false witness. Treat your neighbor as yourself. The way you treat another person will be reflected back on you. So when you use your yetzer hara, the evil inclination, against someone in speech, the lashon hara, the evil tongue, okay, you have set yourself as the judge of the Torah. You have decided how the law is going to apply now. You know, you're smarter than God. The church is smarter than God. We know that we don't have to follow the law. We're smarter than God. No, you're going to get judged for that, okay, by the big guy. So now he gives us the reason. There is one lawgiver and one judge. You do not get to pass verdict because you don't know what Yah is doing in that person's life. It doesn't mean you tolerate everything that the person does. You still make discernments about these things, but you don't decide that he's going to hell.
So in other words, you can judge between right and wrong. You just aren't allowed to pass judgment on that person. That's not your place.
So if I make a judgment, what would I use as my measuring stick?
The Torah.
The Torah, yeah. So that person kept Sabbath or didn't keep Sabbath. It's very clear. God calls that a sin, right? Okay, tuna fish, some have scales, some don't. I don't know what to do with that. And so I kind of go, well, you know, that's your thing. That's between you and God. I don't know what God's doing in your life, right? So if I come over to your house, maybe I wouldn't have tuna fish then, okay, if I like it, or if I'm Orthodox or something. As opposed to going, you're going to hell for this, brother. You can't eat tuna fish, right? So I have to make discernment about what's going on there. Is it holy? Is it unholy? Is it clean? Is it unclean? Is it clean and holy, or holy and not clean? And yeah, I have to think about these things, right? But I just don't automatically go, oh, you're going to hell. Or, and this is the way my personal kind of interpretation here. When I see people coming into the Torah movement, I'm not going to go, okay, you need to do all 613 of these suckers tomorrow, or you're going to hell. Well, what baby ever got everything right? No, it's a learning process. It's a journey. So you better be really careful about snuffing out their spirit, because then God's going to be heaping all over you about this, right? Okay, Mishle, Proverbs 11:9. With his mouth, the godless man would destroy his neighbor, but by knowledge of Torah and wisdom, the righteous are delivered. They learn to keep their mouth shut, in other words. Your neighbor needs love and a hug, not a judge, right? They need to be encouraged along. You know, it's like the kids in the karate school. I do this thing on Fridays where I write out thank you cards or an encouragement cards and stuff like this. And, you know, I could write on there, well, gosh darn it, you did 47 things wrong during class. Or I can say, hey, I really like the way you did that down block, you know, during class. Keep it up. Well, if I attacked them with the 47 things they did wrong, they wouldn't come back next week, right? So I need to focus on giving them a hug and some encouragement, or helping them with their frustration because we're on Zoom and the governor's locked us down type thing. Last year we talked about skip on slander, so I'm gonna skip that this year. I'm gonna skip. Okay, so let's talk about something a little lighter here, but we're gonna talk about gossip now. So The Brit Hadashah, we get two words for one word in Hebrew, slander and gossip. It's essentially disclosing secrets, okay? So Proverbs 20:19, whoever goes about slandering reveals secrets. Therefore, do not associate with a simple babble. Timotheos, Aleph, 1 Timothy 5:13. Besides that, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, and not only idlers, but also gossips and busybodies, saying what they should not say. So the question to ask is, do you gossip or do you listen to gossip? Conspiracy theories are basically gossip, lies and slander, right? And I won't go there right now. We'll do it this way. We'll do a deep dive into politics of 2020 here. So how much news today is speculation?
98%.
Most of it, yeah. Right? I got a report a couple days ago that we now have carrier groups off of the East Coast and the West Coast. We have troops and planes and tanks all converging into Nellis Air Force Base. All the people in town can see all of this going on. There's going to be a coup. We have China's fleet coming out. We have Russia's fleet coming between Britain and France, and they're coming into the North Sea. And I get all these emails, and these people are all worried about this. So what do? I should post it, right? Yeah. Well, no, these are other friends who are emailing me and stuff, right? So I go to the military websites, and you know what? These maneuvers have been planned for quite some time. Weird, right? So then I start digging around, and it all comes back to one radio show of a guy in the Midwest. Okay. Much of the election news is the same thing going on, right? You get like pieces of a report, partial truths and things like this. The latest piece of news is that Trump lost the Supreme Court thing out of Texas, right? So boom, it's over. Well, we should just, we should have inauguration today, right? Well, then you go and you read the report, and he lost on standing, not on the merits of the case. So what's the legal thing they do? They take all of that apart, they go to every state, and they reapply to a lower court, and then it works itself back up. So it's not like it's done, but the way it's reported is just speculation, okay? It's like every piece of information you get today, you have to go back and double check 5 different ways to see if it's even true. And I think Proverbs would have an issue with that. And this is why scripture in context is so important. Pretty soon you end up with the wise men at Jesus' birth, and it's just not a fact. Like every nativity scene on the planet is just wrong, right? Well, where did that start? Some reporter just twisted a little fact somewhere, right? So you have to consider the sources versus speculation. Are you a qualified person to speak about this? Is this person giving me the information an expert in this field? Was I there? Did I actually hear it? Did they actually hear it? So FCEM, Ephesians 4:29. FCEM. This is the church of Ephesus. Of course, they were all, they were victims of emphysema. That's why they are the FCEM. And see, now I said that, and so someone will say, "Oh, Albert said it." Okay, it's a joke, people, right? Okay, so let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace or be pleasant to those who hear. So we're supposed to be the encouragers of the world, That will attract people to you, okay? But the corrupting talk does not attract people. And if it does, it's attracting the wrong people, okay? So our job is as believers is to build people up, right? So in 4:29 in Ephesians there, when Paul says, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, he's not teaching something new. He's teaching Torah, right? He's saying, don't slander, don't gossip, don't share these secrets. Proverbs, Mishle 18, 20, and 21. From the fruit of a man's mouth, his stomach is satisfied. He is satisfied by the yield of his lips. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. There are some who love corrupt talk. There are others who don't. They produce different fruit in your life. Mishle, Proverbs 18:8. Hey, the slander gossip thing is all over the place, right? The words of a whisperer are like delicious morsels. Ooh, I just love to hear that. Wow. They go down into the inner parts of the body. Well, so that's a negative thing is what it's trying to post there, right? Okay. Knowing that stuff is going to eat you alive. Okay, it's going to kill you from within. Give me 1 second. I need to open my door. That's weird. Give me 1 second here. Let me do this. Here we go. Okay. Psalm 141, verses 3 to 4. Set a guard, O Yehovah, over my mouth. Keep watch over the door of my lips. Do not let my heart incline to any evil, to busy myself with wicked deeds, in company with men who work iniquity, and let me not eat of their delicacies. Again, it's like he's making this song right from Proverbs, okay? So again, we have to actually proactively guard over our mouth and lips, to not let your heart incline to evil and get busy with wicked deeds, right? That company of people that are doing that, don't be a part of them. Don't eat of their whisperings. Ephesians, the emphasematics, 5:8-17, Paul says, therefore, do not become partners with them. For at one time you were darkness, but now you are the light in the Lord. Walk as children of the light. For the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true. And try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Messiah will shine on you. Look carefully then how you walk. So this is about how we walk our lives as Torah observant believers. Not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. So we're going to build off of this now. We're supposed to be walking as children of the light, not the darkness, okay? So we are going to go off the reservation here, and we are going to go and talk about Hanukkah, the festival of lights, right? Okay. What is it? Oh, give me a second here. I don't know if this is going to work. Open. Give me a second here to get this pulled up. Welcome to Torah Wars, the return of the Gentiles. Always wanted to do that. Okay, so we're going to talk about some different levels of understanding about Hanukkah. So there are 7 different levels to study Hanukkah on, at least, okay? I doubt we will make them all today, but I'm going to give it my best try for the Gipper. So level number 1 is the Hanukkah's level, plural, Hanukkahs. Number 2, the legendary level. Number 3, the prophetic level. Number 4, the historic level. Number 5, the messianic level. Number 6, the moral level. And number 7, the eschatological level. End times. Study of the end events. Eschatological. Not about scat. Different level. Little farming term there.
Yeah.
So the Hanukkah's level, let's start with this one. And I do have to admit up front here, I was working on reorganizing. I got 200 slides on Hanukkah, and it all got messed up. So I may be hopping all over the place a little bit here today until I can sort all these slides out and figure out where they were supposed to belong. So the Hanukkah's level, I think I've got this one sorted out. And so Hanukkah would be a singular word, right? So I'm making it plural. Hanukkahs in English, right? Okay, Hanukkot, I guess. So the first one that we see in, so Hanukkah actually occurs all over the Bible, okay? So the first place that it shows up at is in the tabernacle in the wilderness. It's the first dedication of the altar because Hanukkah means dedication, okay? We see this in Numbers 7:84. This was the dedication, or Hanukkah, of the altar in the day when it was anointed. And the word for anointed there's 2 words for anointing in Hebrew. The word for anointed there is Mashiach, Messiah, anointed, because he's the anointed one, right? By the princes of Israel. So notice that there's a connection in this verse between the oil and anointing and the altar, okay? We see later that when Yaakov was crossing the river, it was at the Temple Mount. He poured oil on that rock that he set up and put his head on. That he poured oil on the rock, and the word that's used there is Mashiach. And I've always kind of wondered about this connection, and finally this year, it all kind of, the red thread made sense. Okay, so Shlomo's temple, Solomon's temple, 2 Chronicles 7:9, and in the 8th day they made a solemn assembly, for they kept the dedication of the altar, that's Hanukkah, of the altar 7 days, and the feast 7 days. We see in 2 Maccabees 2:9 through 12, it says, it is also related how Solomon in his wisdom offered a sacrifice for the dedication, that's Hanukkah, and the completion of the temple. Just as Moshe prayed to the Lord and fire descended from the sky and consumed the sacrifices, so also Solomon prayed and fire came down and consumed the burnt offerings. Moshe had said, because it had not been eaten, the purification offering was consumed. And Solomon, who celebrated the feast in the same way for 8 days. Okay, so we see Solomon now dedicating the altar in the new temple. Okay, so we see this, and the way he dedicated it is that he poured oil on there. Okay, it's part of the process of making it set apart. So we see in Zerubbabel's temple in the walls, Ezra 6:16, and the children of Israel, the priests and the Levites, and the rest of the children of captivity kept the dedication of this house of God with joy. So now we see dedications of altars attached with a time of joy. In Nehemiah 12:27, and at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites out of all their places to bring them to Jerusalem, to keep the dedication with gladness, both with thanksgiving and with singing, with cymbals, psalteries, and with harps. So we've got a party now at this point, okay? So now we get whole temples made of rocks, Hanukkah'd by the dedication of altars. They're dedicated. When their altar becomes dedicated inside of that, that whole temple becomes set apart, right? Those rocks are now holy rocks. Just like the rock with Jacob at the temple. He made that rock holy. It was set apart. In fact, Hanukkah is all over the Tanakh and the apostolic codices. We'll see more of that as we go on in our study. Okay, but that's the kind of the idea of the Hanukkahs. Okay, that there have been in the Bible, there are several Hanukkahs. Right, we just don't see it because we don't see the word Hanukkah keep getting. We see dedication. Right, so like when our kids were born. At the church, they had this little rite that you go through and you dedicate the babies, right? Okay, well, I'm sorry, that's Hanukkahing them, okay? Mm-hmm. This is why later it says, raise up a child, train a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. That means that kid should have been Hanukkah. Because the word train there is Hanukkah, right? Okay, the prophetic level, people will make the charge that, well, Hanukkah isn't in my Bible, and, I never celebrated growing up or anything. I said, but it's not in the Bible, which is really odd because it's in my Bible all over the place, okay? One problem is simply just the translation work is inconsistent. So we might read in the New Testament, and it'll say Festival of Lights or Feast of Dedication or something like that. But we don't realize that that's the same thing that was going on with Zerubbabel and with Solomon and then Moses, right? So we don't make those connections. Okay, so let's deal with the legend of Hanukkah for a second. So the Maccabees, this is the short version, right? The Maccabees, a group of Jews, successfully rebelled against Antiochus IV Epiphanes. The defiled temple, because of what Antiochus did, the defiled temple was purified and the wicks of the menorah miraculously burned for 8 days, even though there was only enough sacred oil for 1 day's lighting of the menorah. Let's eat. That's the legend of Hanukkah in 3 sentences, okay? But let's actually read the text, and this is where we get into the historical level and kind of see what the text actually says. So this is 1 Maccabees 4:36 to 59. Then Judas and his brothers said, "See, our enemies are crushed. Let us go up and cleanse the sanctuary and dedicate it." What word would that be?
Hanukkah.
Right? So all the army assembled and went up to Mount Zion. That's the Temple Mount today. There they saw the sanctuary desolate or defiled, right? The altar profaned, made common, and the gates burned. In the courts they saw bushes sprung up as in a thicket, or as one of them, or as on one of the mountains. They saw also the chambers of the priests in ruins. Then they tore their clothes and mourned with great lamentation. They sprinkled themselves with ashes and fell face down on the ground. And when the signal was given with the trumpets, they cried out to heaven. Then Judas detailed men to fight against those in the citadel until he had cleansed the sanctuary. He chose blameless priests devoted to the law, and they cleansed the sanctuary and removed the defiled stones to an unclean place. They deliberated what to do about the altar of burnt offering, which had been profaned, and they thought it best to tear it down so that it would not be a lasting shame to them that the Gentiles had defiled it. So they tore down the altar and stored the stones in a convenient place on the temple hill until a prophet should come to tell them what to do with them. Then they took unhewn stones, as the law directs, and built a new altar like the former one. They also rebuilt the sanctuary and the interior of the temple and consecrated the courts. They made new holy vessels and brought the lampstand, the altar of incense, and the table into the temple. Then they offered incense on the altar and lit the lamp on the lampstand, and these gave light to the temple. They placed the bread on the table and hung up the curtains. Thus they finished all the work they had undertaken. Early in the morning on the 25th day of the 9th month, which is the month of Kislev, that's the month we're in right now, in the 148th year, they rose and offered sacrifices the law directs on the new altar of burnt offering that they had built. At the very season and on the very day that the Gentiles had profaned it, it was dedicated with songs and harps and lutes and cymbals. All the people fell on their faces and worshipped and blessed heaven, who had prospered them. So they celebrated the dedication of the altar for 8 days. That's called Hanukkah, and joyfully offered burnt offerings. They offered a sacrifice of well-being and a thanksgiving offering. They decorated the front of the temple with golden crowns and small shields. They restored the gates and the chambers for the priests and fitted them with doors. There was a very great joy among the people, and the disgrace brought by the Gentiles was removed. Then Judas and his brothers and all the assembly of Israel determined that every year at the season of the days of dedication of the altar should be observed with joy and gladness for 8 days, beginning with the 25th day of the month of Kislev.
Oh, Jesus' birthday.
Yeah, Jesus' birthday. Yes, great. Okay, so questions. Let's pick out the truth and what the truth from legend. Okay, was there any oil in that story?
No. None.
Were there 8 days involved in the story?
Yes.
Was there a miracle?
No.
Were there dreidels,
No.
latkes,
No.
sufganiyot,
Know what that is?
jelly donuts,
No. Bummer.
lighting of a menorah?
Yes.
They did light it, yeah. And there was oil, because what do you need to do that?
Oh, I guess there is oil. Yes.
Okay, all right. So let's unpack this a little further. So what does Hanukkah mean? It's an 8-day celebration of Israel's deliverance and rededication of the temple, okay? So in Strong's 4297 translates the word dedication 4 times. We see variant spellings of it. Sometimes, like in Strong's, you'll see Het Nun Kaf Aleph, and in Gesenius, you'll see Het Nun Kaf He. Not a surprise, the He and the Aleph just, it's kind of like a dialectical thing. So from Strong's H2598, dedication or consecration also. 2596, these are all the same, just variations of the word. Hanak, to train, dedicate, or inaugurate, to train or train up. So again, Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go. So dedicate a child in the way he should go. Gesenius takes this word hanak, the verbal root hanak, and he assigns it to make narrow. So if you train someone, what you're doing is you're saying, here's the path. Stay on this path, okay? So the verbal root hanak means to make narrow. Did you make your child's path narrow? Did you teach him right from wrong, holy from unholy, clean from unclean, right? So this is about, Hanukkah is about the mortal combat for cultural supremacy. It's the Greeks against the Hebrews, okay? And in this case, the Hebrews won. So let's dive a little bit further into the historical level now. So there, like with all events in history, there is a historical context. So prior to 200 BC, Judah was part of the kingdom of Egypt when King Antiochus the third, called the Great of Syria, defeated King Ptolemy the fifth Epiphanes of Egypt at the Battle of Panium. Do you remember that when they taught you that in history class, right?
Oh.
So about 200 BC, Israel was a state in what's called the Seleucid Empire, an empire ruled under the Greek law, and under the overall charge of the king of Syria. However, they could follow their own ancestral religion and its practices. In 171 BCE, there was a new king called Antiochus IV, who had called himself Antiochus Epiphanes, which means Antiochus, the visible God. Presumably, at the request of the Tobiads, who led the Hellenization faction in Jerusalem, Antiochus wanted all the empire to follow Greek ways of life and the Greek religion with all of its gods. Some of the Jews wanted to be more Greek, we call that Hellenization, okay, or assimilation, but most wanted to stay Jewish. So he banned reading the Torah, the Sabbath, the festival observances, and death to those who disobeyed. So the brother of the Jewish high priest wanted to be more Greek. So he bribed Antiochus so he would become the new high priest instead of his brother. 3 years later, another man bribed Antiochus even more to let him become the high priest. To pay his bribe, he'd stole some of the objects made of gold that were used in the temple. That's not good, right? That would actually, what is that? Ma'al, that's the sin of Ma'al.
That'll make God grouchy.
Very much so. On his way home from having to retreat from battle, Antiochus stopped in Jerusalem. And he let out all of his anger on the city and the Jewish people. He ordered houses to be burned down. Tens of thousands of Jews were killed or put into slavery. Antiochus then went to attack the Jewish temple, the most important building in Israel to Jews. The Syrian soldiers took all the treasures out of the temple, and on the 15th of Kislev, 168 BCE, Antiochus put up a statue of the Greek god Zeus in the center of the temple. But it had to face Antiochus. Then on the 25th of Kislev, he desecrated the most holy place in the temple and destroyed the Jewish holy scrolls. Okay? Antiochus then banned practicing the Jewish religion. If you were found out, you and all your family were killed, and made the temple into a shrine to Zeus. There were many Jews killed for their faith. Soon afterward, a Jewish rebellion started. It began with a former Jewish priest called Mattathias, who was forced to make an offering to Zeus in his village. He refused to do so and killed a Syrian soldier. Mattathias' sons joined him and killed the other soldiers in the village. Mattathias was an old man, and he died soon after this. But his son Judah then took charge of the freedom fighters. Judah's nickname was Maccabee, okay, which comes from the Hebrew word for hammer. So his nickname was the Hammer. This is like, Dwayne Johnson, his nickname is The Rock, right? So he and his troops lived in caves and fought an undercover war for 3 years. They then met the Syrians in open battle, and they defeated them. And later, you can dig further and further into history and stuff. They came at them with something like 40,000 troops, 20 war elephants. I mean, this was a huge thing, okay? This isn't like 12 guys, standing in a valley, okay? So when they got back to Jerusalem, the temple was in ruins. The statue of Zeus, Antiochus, was still standing. They cleansed the temple. They rebuilt the Jewish altar, and on 25 Kislev, 164 BCE, exactly 3 years after the statue was put up, the altar in the temple was rededicated, Hanukkah, to God. There are several theories about why Hanukkah is celebrated over 8 nights. One legend says that when Judah and his brothers went in the temple, there was only enough oil to burn for 1 night. This is the legend of Hanukkah, right? But that it burned for 8 nights. Another story says that they fought 8 iron spears and put candles on them and used them for lighting in the temple, okay? So there's actually lots of legends that are about this, but none of that shows up in the historical side, okay? Okay, so is Hanukkah a biblical holiday? So we need 2 words to understand this. The first one is moedim, or moed in the singular. The second word is mishteh. So moed, or moedim, is a commanded feast or an appointed time of God, right? So Pesach is a moed, okay? Sukkot, moed. Trumpets, moed. Shavuot, moed, right? They're all appointed times on the calendar of feasts that we're supposed to celebrate. It's synonymous with a hog, a feast, okay? We call these rehearsals, okay? So this other word is mishteh. So we find this in Genesis 21:8. And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned, okay? So a mishteh is something good in life that's worthy of praise. So the weaning of a child, a military victory, a wedding, a temple construction project, all of these could have celebrations attached to it, a birthday party, but they are mishteh. Like, so if I celebrate my birthday party, like for years, like I don't do this a lot, but like celebrating my birthday, but I kind of got rid of it, and I really de-emphasized it in the family and stuff like that, because I'm like, well, it's not a biblical holiday, so we got to get rid of it, because I'm on this purity move, but I did, in my zeal, I went too far, okay? So mishteh is it's a party, it's a festival, okay? But it's just a common thing, okay? It's not a holy thing, right? The problem is the fear of mixing the holy and the profane, the common. So another example of this, a big example of this that happens in Scripture, is Purim, okay? and which we find in Esther. Okay, so Purim is also Mishteh. You go, well, it's not in Torah, damn it, so we don't do it in our congregation. Okay, I don't care. Okay, because it's not a moed, right? If you want to do it, do it. You don't want to do it, don't do it. Don't force it on someone else, right? It's simply a national Jewish festival, and it would be the equivalent of our 4th of July. If you want to have a party, have a party. If you want to wear red, white, and blue, wear red, white, and blue. I don't care, right? Because it's Mishteh. Pam wants to have a birthday party, and I don't. Great. I don't care, right? Okay. Yeah, you ain't getting nothing. Okay, so Hanukkah and Purim are simply celebrations over the enemies of their faith. So it would be like, today, if we have Veterans Day, right? So I walk up to a veteran and I say, hey, thanks so much for your service. I cannot even understand or comprehend what you went through and the sacrifice that you and your friends went through. Thank you so much for your service. That's Mishteh, right? I'm not saying it's Pesach. We're not having lamb here, okay? So Hanukkah is a picture of Antiochus Epiphanes as the anti-Messiah. He's a picture of the anti-Messiah, Antichrist, and we are celebrating that defeat. That's not a bad thing to celebrate. We beat the devil. Let's have a party tonight. Let's get a beer, right? Purim is a picture of Haman as the anti-Messiah, and we celebrate his defeat. That's probably, it's not a bad thing to celebrate if you want to celebrate it. If you're looking for a reason to have a beer, that's a great one, okay? I mean, you do not have to go any further than that, okay? Well, and so last night, David Nita came over, right? And so they brought pizza, and I had beer, and I said, yeah, come on over, bring the pizza. I've got beer for you guys. We'll have a Hanukkah party. And they're like, okay, right? So what did I do to celebrate Hanukkah on day 2? Beer and pizza. Great. Is that wrong? No, it's Mishteh, right?
Last I heard, you had more than beer to hand out.
There are stories that are going around about this, yes. So it was sinful. If it was sinful to do this, the Jews would have figured this out in their own language a long time ago and not participated in Purim instead of adding it, okay? They understand in their language and their culture that Mishteh isn't a Moedim, so they don't have any problem with it. Now, would you emphasize Mishteh over Moedim? Well, no. Mishteh is just Mishteh, right? It's common. It's not holy. Okay, so why is Hanukkah different from Christmas and Easter then? Okay, so a tree, gift giving, mentions on shelves, unicorns are all these things that you see on the Hanukkah end cap displays. They are all stolen from Christian Christmas. Okay, December 25th, Kislev 25. It's just repackaged sun god worship, okay? So Devarim 12:30-31 says, take heed to thyself, and thou be not snared by following them. After that, they be destroyed from before thee, and that thou inquire not after their gods, saying, how do these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise. Thou shalt not so do unto Jehovah thy God. For every abomination to Jehovah which he hateth have they done unto their gods. For even their sons and their daughters they have burnt in the fire to their gods, told us not to do what the pagans do. So in other words, he tells us don't do what the pagans do, right? So what we do, not so much we, what the early church did is they used syncretism as an evangelistic tool. And so they would combine these other things from the pagans into their walk of faith as a Christian, as a believer, and it becomes de rigueur, the course of the day. It's just accepted now because we've done it for 2,000 years, and we just think it's normal to do these things now. There's actually no thought about it, right? And then we have to support, we make doctrine to support the tradition, okay? So the verbal root of shatah, remember mishteh is the common festival. The verbal root is shatah, and it means a banquet, a feast, or to drink. Gesenius translates it a drinking and a banquet. So the verbal root in the call prefix, it means to drink, about drinking the cup of God's wrath, of slaughter, or of wicked deeds. It can mean to feast, and in the nephal, it means to become drunk. In Strong's, and it's Strong's H 8354, meaning it's used as drinking 208 times, drinkers once, drunkards once, banquet once, and miscellaneous 6 times. So primarily it's about having a beer, okay? It's about having a drink, okay? Gesenius translates it as drinking together, okay? Okay, so then this question arises, isn't Hanukkah just for the Jews? So understand what I talked about earlier about that, the text in the Gospels, is that Matthew says that if that person, if you go to your brother, and Matthew 18, you go through those 3 steps, and they still don't listen, then you kick them out, and when you kick them out, then they're a Gentile, okay? So if you were a Gentile who came in, you're now Israel, right? So when you get kicked out, now you're a Gentile again. So you can't call yourself a Gentile Christian. That's a category error, okay? So it's an incredibly important holiday that was celebrated by our own Messiah and should be at least acknowledged by all believers. Why? Well, it teaches truth versus error, honesty versus deception, authentic versus counterfeit, holy versus common or secular, clean versus unclean, tameh and tahor, and the future fulfillments in prophecy are essential to understanding the end times timeline and events spoken of all through the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament. It teaches you to know the difference between Messiah and anti-Messiah. It is a radical revolution or transformation of the body of Mashiach is possible. So are these things for the Jews? I think Paul would say, heaven forbid. That's for all Israel. Because God knows that the church has it all figured out and doesn't need a transformation today, right?
Right.
So, yeah, a little sarcasm if you didn't catch it there, okay? So there are many articles on the rise about Hanukkah among Christians today. It is reviving among Christians. Why? Because they've done Christmas for so long and found it wanting. So when the church itself has to produce programs about giving less at Christmas, not going into debt, and helping other people, you have to realize it was the church that started the problem, okay? And now they're trying to fix it. The problem is they're trying to fix something that's not in the Bible, okay? So people are now returning to Hanukkah, just like they're returning to Torah. People are returning to Hanukkah now. So if you are a believer, should you bring Hanukkah into your home? So here are 6 reasons to celebrate Hanukkah. And again, it's a mishteh, right? Please understand me on that. So given that Hanukkah is a historically Jewish festival and that its celebration is not a mitzvah, it's not a commandment of the Torah, why would a believer celebrate it today? obviously, Jewish believers have a cultural affinity for the festival. What I could actually say there, or you could say Hebrew believers have a cultural affinity for the festival because it should be all Israel, okay? But is there any real biblical significance to it? Is there any reason believers might want to incorporate the celebration of Hanukkah into their homes? So here's 6 reasons. Did you know that Hanukkah is in the Gospels?
Yes.
Hanukkah is not mentioned in the Hebrew scriptures. Now, the word Hanukkah is, but not the celebration of Hanukkah as a mishteh, okay? Because the story, the historical event of Hanukkah, happened after the last book of Torah, the Tanakh, was written, okay? However, Hanukkah is mentioned in the New Testament, and Yeshua went up to the temple for the feast of Hanukkah. He was in the midst of Hanukkah. So we can read in John chapter 10 that Yeshua was in Solomon's colonnade for the Feast of Dedication, right? Which is another name for Hanukkah. And at that time, the Feast of Dedication took place at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Yeshua was walking in the temple in the colonnade of Solomon. That's John 10, 22 to 23. The master was acknowledging this feast during this time with his people. We can follow his example and unite with Israel and stand in solidarity with them, especially in today's world of hatred and growing anti-Semitism, right? The whole point is that the Jews and the Christians, if you will, the believers, are supposed to be one. Give me a second. I just realized my cord came undone here. There we go. We're safe. So just this last, it was 2 weeks ago, many people are looking at leaving Facebook and stuff like this because of all the issues going on with the tech companies and stuff, privacy, censorship, all of this. And so there's this other thing that came out called Parler, okay? And so I was like, well, I'll go check it out. And so, I subscribed to it just to see what it was like. And so then I went back to Facebook and I put this little post and I said, please come join me on and follow me on Parler. And then I get this message from someone and they're like, you mean that anti-Semitic site? I'm like, are you calling me an anti-Semite if I join this? You do not have any idea how I live my life. I'm a better Jew than most Jews are. That's ridiculous that you would say this. Number 2, did you know that Hanukkah is a story of religious persecution? So Hanukkah is a story of religious persecution and standing up for faith in God. It's about teaching people how to stand up for God. Yeshua, and doesn't God say, if you acknowledge me before others, I'll acknowledge you? Well, what a great opportunity. So Yeshua tells us that we can expect persecution, but he also tells us that we must stand firm in our faith. Hanukkah is the perfect time of year to think about these issues and reflect on how the Maccabees stood up under harsh persecution because their faith in honoring God motivated them more than their fear did. They were living in caves for 3 years, fighting a physical warfare. This is a beautiful lesson that all the families of faith can and should impart to their children. They should Hanukkah them. They should teach them how to stand up. Yeshua also stood up under persecution, even to the point of death, in order to honor his Father. Point number 3. Did you know that Hanukkah is the festival of the light of the world? So we call it Festival of Lights, but it's really the festival of the light of the world is the point. So Hanukkah is the festival of light. It celebrates the relighting of the menorah lamp that burned in God's holy temple. In rabbinic terminology, the menorah was sometimes called the light of the world. Yeshua said, I am the light of the world. And another time he told his disciples, you are the light of the world. And we'll look at that in context a little bit later in the study. The beautiful, soft, warm glow of the candles of the menorah provides the perfect backdrop against which to reflect on how a small amount of light permeates all areas of darkness. And we can find inspiration to let our faith in Yeshua shine through our actions and thus affect the darkness of the world around us. So yesterday, my friends are going to come over. And so we're like, let's get some food together, right? And I say, we'll have a Hanukkah party. Now understand, it's a mishteh, right? I can have anybody at my mishteh I want. Believers, unbelievers, anything, right? The mishteh. But that's just, I recognize that it's Hanukkah, okay? And it's that season of the light of the world, right? So I bring people into my life, or I end up in their lives, right? And funny opportunities then show up to talk about Torah, right? And so I have my menorah, right? So Nita sees this. Get this out for you guys. So here's my menorah, right? So this was day 1. This was day 2. And Nita comes up and she goes, I don't know anything about, the celebration and stuff like that, but you really need to put wax in the bottom of these and get your candles straightened out, because that's the saddest menorah I've ever seen. And I'm like, you're totally right. And it's a tradition, and it's mishteh, and that's why I don't care, right? Every candle has to be right on the birthday cake. No, just take one and stick it in the middle. It's fine. I don't care, right? That's not my thing, okay? So then, of course, my first night burned. So last night was the second night. This is the first night, and it burns off. So I start watching TV, and I look back 2 hours later, and the whole thing's burnt down. I'm like, I have no more candles. Not only that, I'm missing the last day. Where are my candles? They're in storage. And now today's Sabbath. I can't go get one. So what do? They just burn down. So I'm not doing the right rabbinic thing. I don't care, right? We're getting close.
Yeah.
We're going to be day 3. I'll burn that stuff down too, right? But I don't need if you want to do a rabbinic tradition, great. I think it's good to learn about and understand and learn how it was developed as a culture and a community and stuff like that. But it's a mishteh, right? It's not a moed. Okay. So let me sidebar, give you a little detail here. So during the Feast of Sukkot, they would erect 4 giant menorot in the outer court. These things were 70 feet tall. Each one of them had 4 giant vats, I think it was 70 liters, 4 giant vats up at the top to hold oil. They would have young teenage priest kids that would climb up the ladder and keep pouring this stuff in it all day and night long, okay? And Josephus records that these lights were so bright that all of Jerusalem was lit, okay? They were just immense. The light was immense, okay? During the festival of Hanukkah, mishteh, right? During the festival of Hanukkah, they would re-erect those menorot. And the kid priest would put the oil in it and the 4 vats and all the light, and it would light up Jerusalem, right? Those 4 menorot that were in the temple square, those 4 menorot were called the light of the world because they lit up the whole place, okay? So Yeshua's up at the temple. He's walking around up there during the Feast of Hanukkah, and he goes, yeah, you guys got this mishteh thing going on here. And I'm okay with that. I'm not going to rip you on that, okay? Because it's mishteh. I can't rip you on that, okay? And you're doing it for a good reason, all these things. Hanukkah, but I am the light of the world. This is great. It's great symbolism, okay? But what you need to grasp is that I am the light of the world. Okay? But see, he couldn't have said that without them doing that. Okay? It was the fact that he walked into that situation that allowed him to give us what he says in the Gospels. Okay? Not only that, then he says, speaking to the disciples, speaking to you, he says, you will be the light of the world. Well, that puts a little pressure on me. Thanks a lot, right? All right, so Yeshua talked, point 4, Yeshua talked about Hanukkah. He warned his disciples that things that happened to the story of Hanukkah would happen again. You know, that whole Judah the Hammer Maccabee thing, okay? So when you see and this is Matthew 25, 15 and 16. It's also in Mark 13, 13 to 16, okay? He says, so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, see, this was a prophetic event, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So to understand what he was saying is his disciples had to know the story of Hanukkah. If you want to understand the abomination of desolation that he says is coming again, right? If you want to understand that, you must understand the story of Hanukkah. If you get rid of the story of Hanukkah, then you will not understand the future prophetic events. You can't. You're missing data. We would study that in the prophetic level section of this later. So his words come into clear focus for us, his modern day disciples, when we study the Hanukkah story and find its parallels and messages. Our master's words are still as important for us today as they were for his disciples in their day. Number 5, did you know that Hanukkah commemorates the dedication of God's temple? Well, so we've talked a lot about that one so far today. Hanukkah means dedication. It is a remembrance of when the Jews cleansed and rededicated God's holy temple for Yehovah's service alone. The New Testament tells us that we are God's temple. So we can take the time during this season to spiritually strengthen ourselves and to make sure that our temples are clean, void of idolatry, and prepared to be the place where God's Spirit can dwell in peace in us. So there are many lessons to be learned through the example of the people of God in the story of Hanukkah. Embracing this time gives us the opportunity to connect with all Israel, B'nai Israel, to learn our history and continue the good fight that they started. Number 6, there would be no believers today without Hanukkah. You'd be off worshiping some pagan god without Hanukkah, okay? If the Greeks had defeated Judah Maccabee and his band, the Jews would have been wiped out in 164 BC. But because they stood up in their generation, Yeshua was conceived years later on the last day of the Feast of Hanukkah. So, no Hanukkah, no Jesus. So is it a good idea to bring it into your home? I think there's some really valuable lessons that believers could use in their own walk of faith to strengthen it from this story, particularly in the time we're living in right now. There's just so much end time junk going on in the world and stuff. Okay, so now my notes are all messed up at this point. So let me see what time it is. Oh, we did pretty good there. Let me skip down to the next section. Kind of odd, right? Um, So there are so today there are 4 books of the Maccabees. Maccabees 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, 3 and 4 are not considered, not even considered apocrypha. That's why I put this in here. Give me 1 second here. So so you might hear this word apocrypha used, okay? So there's the Bible and then there's apocrypha, okay? So the word apocrypha means hidden. It doesn't mean bad, okay? So in synagogues, like if you were to go, a couple thousand years ago to the Cairo Geniza, the synagogue, and they had the Torah and the Tanakh, or the Tanakh shelf. So they keep the Torah scrolls here, okay? And then they had this other shelf, and that was the Apocrypha. It was the non-Torah books. And of course, back then it was the scrolls, right? So then the Greeks come along and they give us books, okay? So, well, not the Greeks, it was the Middle Ages before we got books. So the Apocrypha are the books that were in the back. They were hidden in the back, okay? So they wouldn't put the Bible with other books. The Bible was special. In fact, the idea of putting names on the front of books started with the Bible, right? Because it needed to be set apart. So even if you were, if you went to synagogue, you would never, like in church, we grab it, we bring up all our stuff, we stick it under our pew or chair. You would never do that. They never allow books down on the floor in the synagogue, okay? Found that out personally one day. So the Apocrypha wasn't considered taboo. It was the other books, okay, that weren't on the level of Torah. So if you were to go to the Jerusalem Bible today, it contains the Apocrypha. I have a Catholic Bible. It contains the Apocrypha. And it's to be read as history. It's not Torah. We all know it's not Torah, okay? We're not idiots. But because it's not Torah, it's less than Torah, we keep it separate. It's common. This is holy, that's common, right? So, but we still have several versions that still include some of the Apocrypha, like the Maccabees. The Maccabees, 1611 King James Bible, contained the Maccabees. Where was it? In the back. It was hidden in the back, okay? So books 3 and 4 of the Maccabees aren't even considered apocrypha. They're pseudo-epigraphical writings, okay? So, meaning that there's huge mistakes in them. We don't know who wrote it, all sorts of different things like that. Okay, first, here's what you need to, so there was originally one book of Maccabees, what we call today 1st and 2nd Maccabees. So we ended up, just like we have 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Well, in a Torah scroll, that's one book. Okay, 1st and 2nd Samuel, no. In a Torah scroll, that's one scroll. Okay, so the church ended up separating these into 2 books. Okay, so the book of 1st Maccabees is about Alexander the Great. Okay, so it's chapter 1, 1 through 9. It talks about how he is the apostle, the sent one of Hellenism, which is a one world system. Ever heard that phrase before? It started there, okay? Talks about Helen of Troy, talks about the spirit of Nimrod, the rebel, talks about what Hellenism is. It's a worldview, it's a paradigm, and it affects all of culture. We have this word polis in the Greek that still shows up in our language. We get the word police from it. Politics, the idea of the gymnasium, education, relationships. It affects all parts of life, okay? And then it contains the Hanukkah story. Book 2 of Maccabees is not a following book. It's not what happened afterwards. It's a parallel reading, okay? And it talks about the Syrian Greeks would enter the temple having drinking parties. They would sleep with prostitutes. Second Maccabees 6:1-11 tells a story about the Jewish women circumcising their sons according to Torah, and that they were arrested and thrown from the top of the city wall to their death. 2 Maccabees 6 talks about those who were keeping Sabbath and caught were burned alive. See, that's persecution. So the Maccabees in 1885 was taken out of the original 1611 King James Bible. It was removed by the American and British Bible Societies. There was a time when you went to prison for taking out Maccabees. So think about this. If you took the book of Maccabees out of your Bible, the Archbishop of Canterbury enforced this law that you were sent to prison. These guys didn't get sent to prison. See, we don't do that anymore, right? Okay. That's not a worthy crime. But why did they do it back then? Because they believed, the church believed, that the book of Maccabees was an important historical document for all believers, because if you don't have Maccabees and you don't have them defeating the Greek, you don't get Jesus. You don't get a Messiah. And we can't make the Messiah Greek. So if we get rid of the Maccabees, now we can have a disobedient Messiah who tells us don't follow Torah. So basically they're trying to, if I can get away with this, grease the Bible, right? But what we need to do during this period of time is degrease it with light and truth. We did this one last year, talked about that.
So King James was the first one that took it out.
Mhm. Okay, we did all of this last year. World. Okay, so the idea of getting rid of the Jewishness then. If we get rid of Maccabees, then we can get rid of the other Jewish stuff in the Bible too. This has been a long-running thing going on with translators. So we can have a Gentile Christian version of the Bible. So we interrupt your regularly scheduled Shabbating for an announcement of biblical proportions. We now have the translation of these verses from Hebrew manuscripts, okay? We've got multiple lines of Hebrew manuscripts. We have what's called the Itala. We have the Ramont. We have the Catalan. Now we've got the Indian version, right? These are all written by Messianic Jews who are outside of the Roman Church influence. So he says, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a menorah, and it gives light to all in the house. Yeah, because see, that would be they would understand because they have menorot in their houses, right? And they understand that it sheds light and things like this, right?
That's the reason why they don't want to read the Bible. And they kind of do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just,
So warning Roe Robinson, Matthew 15 tells us to be careful about traditions, and it's only okay if they don't trump a commandment. We're gonna skip through this part. It just keeps getting deeper. Last year we did all the blessings, kindling it. We talked about the songs. We translated the songs related to the menorah, all the stanzas. So I'm just skipping through all this stuff here. So that idea of being a city on a hill, let your light shine, is where we get the tradition of putting the Hanukkah in the window. The point is other people can see your light, okay? It's just a tradition. You don't have to do it, but it's a physical action attached to this that would demonstrate it. And it's honestly, it's where we end up getting Christmas lights from. Okay, then we talked about dreidels last year. Great game for kids without the beer drinking. Okay, so so then we get fried foods. This is one of the traditions in Judaism. So the question becomes, why fried food? So an example would be what's latkes, okay? So a latkes, they call it, it's always listed, it'll say potato pancakes, okay? So what do we call potato pancakes today? We have a good English word for this. Yeah, if you were to fry up some potatoes, what'd you call them?
Well, I'd call them French fries. I'd call them French fries. But they're
Ah,
not
that-
French.
Does that look like a pancake though?
No.
Okay, so what would potato pancake? Hash browns.
Oh, duh.
Yeah, right. They're cooked in oil. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So then we get sufganiyot. Sufganiyot are what we would call deep fried jelly donuts. Okay. So the point isn't the food. What they did is they said, what are things that we can use to include oil? Because this is all about dedicating the altar. And to dedicate the altar, we have to anoint it with oil. What kind of oil? Mashiach oil, okay? And so this is how you teach kids in a family, how you create traditions in the family, that it's a part of your life and it's constantly talking about the Bible, right? Or we could have Easter bunnies and do the same thing. Oh, not? I guess that wouldn't work, would it? Because there's no Easter bunnies in the Bible. It's not like it's real hard, right?
But there is oil.
But there is in a Gentile Christian Bible. Because, Easter's about Jesus, okay? And then everybody goes, what are the bunnies about,
His resurrection.
right? Yeah. Hot cross buns of Tammuz? I don't understand. Family and friends are a big part. Okay, so you invite people over to celebrate along with you. Great. There's nothing wrong. You should be having people over every night. Okay,
And it's right there.
because everybody would be like, wow, these are the greatest people ever, right? So honestly, when Nita and David came over, it wasn't so much me. I was going to invite them on Friday night, and they actually called me up first, and they go, hey, can we come over? I'm like, sure. We're going to have a Hanukkah party then, right? Food is a great conversation starter. Again, serve something they're not expecting and make them ask why, right? What are these? Oh my gosh, they're delicious, right? Okay. So let others see how awesome our Elohim is, right? Now, this is my fun way of doing it, right? This is what I'm wearing today, right?
Yeah,
This is the way I roll, and it's a dreidel, right? So I go off to Trudy's yesterday. I meet with David, Nita, and Rick and Kathy, and we have a great lunch there and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, I pull out these bags of gelt, the gold coins, right? And I give everybody bags of gelt, and they're like, "Oh, what's this?" And I go, "It's a Hanukkah gift, And they're like, "What is it?" And I'm like, "It's gold coins. Who else gives you guys gold coins for holidays? I'm not cheap with my friends. What's in it? Chocolate." And they're like, "You're the greatest guy ever. We get chocolate whenever we see you, right?" I'm making friends, right? I'm deepening relationships so that other deeper conversations can come on. So then I pull out my dreidels, okay? And I give everybody a dreidel, and we're all spinning dreidels. And they go, well, why are there Hebrew letters on it? What does that stand for? Oh, Nes Gadol Hayom Ha'apo, or Sham. And so they're asking me these questions about the dreidels, right? And they're having fun spinning these little tops, right? And so then I go, so you guys want to know the truth now? And they go, what do you mean? And I'm like, so the whole dreidel thing is a huge Hanukkah event. And I mean, you know, everybody likes to do this for Hanukkah and stuff like this. It's just an old German beer drinking game. And they're like, what? They're like, this is a tradition I can get behind. Do we get to have beer next time? Right? So boom, I'm sucking people into Torah, right? What we're supposed to do. We let our light shine. So whatever traditions you pick, again, I don't care. It's mishteh, right? It's whatever your family does. I'm totally fine with that. But don't give up on Hanukkah, right? There are some there are great lessons for us in Hanukkah. There are many levels of Hanukkah to study, and there are prophetic events to study. So I want to do one more thing. Pretty sure it's way down here at the end. Oh, we talked about the olive tree in Zechariah last year, how that fits the Hanukkah. Okay, further. Getting close. Hang in there. Okay, so this is an article from a rabbi, Messianic rabbi, and I wanted to use this at the end because it brings in this idea of the abomination of desolation. So his essay is called, "What Do Jelly Donuts and Latkes Have to Do with the Anti-Messiah and the Abomination of Desolation?" That definitely caught my eye. So he says, there's a lot more to the Hanukkah story than just candles, dreidels, and potato latkes. The story of Hanukkah annually reminds us of the ongoing spiritual war against God's people, the threat of religious persecution, and the heroic sacrifices of those who have laid down their lives rather than refusing to compromise their convictions. Hanukkah recalls a dark time in Jewish history when the Seleucid Syrian Greek government made the study of Torah illegal. In those days, circumcising your son could get both you and the child put to death. Jews who kept the Sabbath and holy days risked their lives to do so. The villain of the Hanukkah story was the king of Syria, Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes was the Antichrist of his generation. When the Syrian-Egyptian war between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies spilled into Israel, Antiochus took Jerusalem. He encouraged the Jewish people to assimilate into their nations, and setting aside the distinctive marks of Jewish identity, he forbade the study of Torah observance. He set up an idol of Zeus in the temple, and according to some versions of the story, he had the craftsman impose a likeness of his own face onto the idol. The prophet Daniel foresaw the sacrilege and referred to it as the abomination of desolation. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering. And they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant. That's Daniel 11, 31 and 32. Daniel's prophecy about the abomination of desolation was fulfilled in the days of the Hanukkah revolt, but it is not merely a relic of Jewish history. Our master warned his disciples that history would repeat itself. We see this many times. Prophecies are dual or triple often. Our master warned his disciples that history would repeat itself. He told his disciples that if they should see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, they should flee from Jerusalem and Judea and take shelter in the hills. That's Matthew 24:15. These words predicted the rise of another tyrant like Antiochus, who would place an image in God's temple. Likewise, the Apostle Paul explains that the Antichrist will be the man of lawlessness, that's Torahlessness, who exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. That's 2 Thessalonians 2, 3, and 4. Paul might as well have been describing Antiochus Epiphanes, just as Antiochus IV forbade Torah observance and defiled the temple with an idol bearing his own image. The Antichrist, the man of lawlessness, Torahlessness, will declare that the Torah is void. He will create an abomination of desolation and declare himself divine, deceiving the world to worship the beast and its image, Revelation 14:9. 2 centuries after Antiochus IV, in the days of the apostles, several Roman emperors did exactly that. The Roman Emperor Gaius Caligula filled the role of Antichrist for his generation. He persecuted the Jewish people for observing the Torah, and he dispatched Roman legions from Syria with the assignment of placing an idol of Zeus, the abomination of desolation, in the temple of Jerusalem. After him came Nero and Flavian emperors, all top contenders for the title of Antichrist, with Roman legions marching against the Jewish people in the land of Israel. Coincidentally, those legions came primarily from the Roman garrisons in Syria. They overthrew Jerusalem and established a temple of Zeus on the Temple Mount, the abomination of desolation that our master warned about. The festival of Hanukkah reminds us of the tyrants of the past, and it warns us about the tyrant yet to come. Again, the world teeters closer and closer to Armageddon and the war of Gog and Magog today. The birth pains of Messiah are the daily headlines of our newspapers, and the contractions of the birth pains seem to be increasing in frequency. So this is not the time for us to back away, but instead the time for us to press in as life gets more and more difficult and the anti-Messiah begins to reign more and more in the world. All right, guys. I hope you learned something today. Let me switch back to this and to that. All right, so I hope you guys have a fabulous rest of your week, a Shavua Tov. Those that are celebrating Hanukkah, may all of your Hanukkah candles not be socially distanced, and may not put a mask on them and cover them. Let your menorah shine, and hope you guys have an absolutely great rest of your Sabbath.
Great. Thank you. You too, Albert.
Take care.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.